Hello everyone, you're listening to The Right Side of Gaming. Today we're going to go over all the red spells in Magic Legends. But I do want to throw out a little disclaimer. I've been using Vex for Life just because they had this handy little chart that made it really simple. I know that they were on the Magic Legends list for like early access and all this other stuff. I assumed that they were putting out correct information. Apparently that is not the case. I noticed the other day that I picked up on one of the spells in game that we had talked about, Spawning Bed. They have it down as summon 5 Camerid eggs, and then it has an ability to sacrifice one and hatch it randomly. It's not what it does in the game. I mean, it's close, but it's not quite. I'm going to take a look at the MLARPG.com version. Take a look at the description. You still summon the 5 Camerid eggs, but they have a special ability that after you cast 2 sorceries, all surviving eggs hatch and create up to 5 Camerids. It's however many eggs you have left. So some of these may not be entirely accurate. They'll probably still be close enough for you to get a feel for what they do. And I'll probably have to go back at some point and just check and see which ones right, which ones were wrong. But I just want you to know that right now, MLARPG looks to be the better site for if you just want to get accurate information. Just would take a long time to go through all the cards the way they have it set up. So, what do we have so far? We have the Gitu Lava Runner. Whenever you cast a sorcery, this creature gets +1/+0 for 10 seconds. I feel like red doesn't have as close a focus as some of the other colors. They're a little bit more spread out with some of their effects. But if there's one thing they really like, it's damage. And a lot of it is going to be through their sorceries anyway, so this kind of plays into that. We have Goblin Offensive, which is Summon X. So you hold down the button to summon more goblins. In this case, since you have up to 12 mana you can spend, you can summon up to 11 goblins. That's it. It just makes a bunch of goblins. It's one of our go wide cards in red, and to be fair, a bunch of goblins has been a thing in red in the card game forever, so I think a lot of people will enjoy this. We have Goblin Firebomber. It's a special ability that creates a hazard at a target location and deals damage to enemies inside of it over time. And then when it dies, it's going to deal damage to nearby enemies. So it's basically throwing its little bombs, and then when it dies, it's like, oh, the one I was holding just went off. So it's flavorful, if nothing else. We have Juvenile Cavu. Whenever you cast a sorcery, it deals damage as well as damage over time to nearby enemies at random. And we have the bigger version, the Flame Tongue Cavu, that's going to deal damage to enemies in a line. We have Lightning Elemental, that when it gets summoned, it's going to deal damage and stun nearby enemies. And has a special ability that it's going to teleport, deal damage, and repeat the stun. It's also worth noting that we see this a lot in red. They really like their more offensive creatures when they do make them. So you get a lot of high power, low toughness creatures. That doesn't mean we don't have some beefier options. We have the Earth Elemental, which is a 3/5. And whenever it's summoned, it taunts enemies, and then has a special ability to deal damage and an AoE in front of it. We have Emberlings, our summon 3 creatures card in red. So for 4 mana, you're going to get 3 2/1s. And when they die, they're basically going to explode on people. You have Goblin Warchief. Other creatures you control get +1/+0. So it has sort of a Lord effect that buffs up your other creatures. Normally those are for goblins, but it has a goblin-specific one as well. Goblins you control also gain greater swiftness. So goblins you control are going to get +1/+0 greater swiftness. Everything else is just going to get a straight +1/+0. It's really good in go wide decks, especially the goblin go wide decks, but you can mix it up with some of the other colors just fine. Next we have one of our mythics, Galvanized Dreadnought. It has piercing, so its projectiles are going to pass through enemies. It has a special ability to deal damage and knock down enemies in front of it. And it has an activated ability where if you have it out on the field already and draw it into your hand, you can pay 2 mana to give it +4, -3 for 10 seconds. So assuming no other buffs or debuffs or anything, that turns this into an 8/3. So it goes from being one of your little more tanky creatures to really a really aggressive red type of creature. We have Ogre Mortar. It's going to deal damage to enemies in a small area and create a 1/1 Goblin creature token for 30 seconds. So imagine him basically just throwing goblins around and hitting people with them. And when it dies, I guess some of its goblins escape because it's going to summon 3 1/1 Goblin creature tokens. That's a fun way to get a bunch of goblins out on the field, I feel like. We have Werewolf Shaman. It's going to summon a wolf creature as its special ability. And if it's transformed, if it's a werewolf instead of a human at the time, it's going to charge forward, deal damage, and create a hazard that deals damage over time. So whenever you control 4 or more wolves or werewolves, that's when you transform it. So that special ability to summon wolves is going to slowly build up, and you get enough out there, boom, you transform it. It's going to gain lesser swiftness, it's going to move a little faster, it's going to get +3/+0, which will bump it up to a 5/3. We have Shivan Dragon. That on summon is going to deal damage to nearby enemies, and it has an activated ability. If you draw into it while it's already on the field, you're basically going to get to pay to do a little breath weapon. It's going to deal damage in a cone in front of it. We have Magma Colossus. If there's no enemies near it, it's going to attack from range. So it's either going to do its normal melee attacks, or it's going to start throwing stuff, I guess, rather than trying to get right up in their face. And whenever it attacks from range, it gains trample. So its base attacks are going to hit multiple targets. So whenever it's doing its melee thing, it's single target, but whenever it starts throwing stuff, it's basically got ranged AoEs. We have Earthquake, another X effect. It's going to deal damage to nearby enemies twice per second for as long as you maintain the spell, and there's a chance that the enemies are going to be knocked into the air. So again, you can hold it down for up to 11 times, so that would be damaging them 22 times if you pay the full 12 mana. We have Shock, which is our absolute cheapest spell. Just going to deal damage to enemies at a target location. Burning Rage, going to taunt nearby enemies, so you are going to taunt them. And during that time, whenever you damage an enemy with your primary attack, they're going to take additional damage equal to 50% of the damage dealt. So it's like you have that weaker version of crit on your primary attack. We have Fire Dance. It's going to deal damage to a random enemy 4 times per second for 10 seconds. So it's just going to randomly be doing damage around you. If you like that more chaotic approach to red, this is going to be right up your alley. We have Lightning Strike. It's going to deal damage to enemies in a line. Seismic Grasp. It's going to deal damage to enemies in a cone and pull them towards you. Slag Strike. It's going to have you charge to an enemy and deal damage to it. And it's going to crit and deal double damage to an enemy that's affected by a damage over time effect. We have Act of Treason. Can take control of an enemy, and that enemy gains greater haste and greater swiftness while it's under this spell's effect. So if you steal an enemy, it's going to move and attack faster. whenever red steals stuff in the card game, it's usually temporary, unlike blue, which can keep them around for longer. But when red steals them, it usually gives them haste, so that and I think untaps them, maybe. So that you can immediately attack with them, and then it just goes back to the owner at the end of the turn. So I think they kind of got the feel of that one down pretty well. Earth Strike is just going to deal damage to enemies in a line. Pyroclasm is going to deal damage, as well as additional damage over time to nearby enemies. See a lot of those damaging sorceries so far. We have Fatal Frenzy. The creature you control with the highest power gains plus X plus 0, where X is that creature's power. So you're basically doubling a creature's power for a short period of time, but then you're sacrificing it when the effect ends. We have Elemental Shatter. Create a hazard at a location that taunts all enemies for 3 seconds, then deals damage to nearby enemies. We have Goblin Bombardment, which is just more goblin throwing, and I love it. You can deal damage to enemies in a line, and then it's going to deal additional damage to enemies at full health. This is one of those times where I'm not sure if they mean for it to deal an extra 10%, or if it's another one of the 100% ones. So, you know what we can do? Go over here. We're going to look up Goblin Bombardment, and we're just going to see what it says. Deal 100% additional damage to foes at full health. So I have to assume that, yes, that is a typo, not an additional crit modifier compared to some of the others we've seen. We have Char. It's going to deal damage to enemies in a cone. It's going to repel you backwards, so you're just going to deal damage and sort of jump back. We have Lava Vortex. It's going to create a hazard at target location that deals damage over time. We have Molten Shell, which is going to give you a shield that will absorb damage for a period of time. And it's going to deal damage over time to nearby enemies. We have Magma Burst, which is going to deal damage to enemies in a cone, as well as critting on enemies that are under a damage over time effect. And we've seen several damage over time effects in red, so I think you can find a way to pull it off. We have one of our mythics, Bathe in Dragonfire. It's going to deal damage to enemies in a line and create a hazard that deals damage over time to enemies. We have Goblin Rush. So for 30 seconds, whenever you cast a sorcery, you're going to create a 1/1 Goblin creature token for 30 seconds. Red really likes its damaging sorceries, so it's really easy to work some of those in, and you're just going to get more goblins. Fuming Onslaught. For 30 seconds, creature spells cost 25% as much, so you can play them a lot easier. You can start playing more creature spells. Those creatures are going to gain greater swiftness and greater haste, so they're going to move and attack faster, but then you sacrifice them after 15 seconds. If you're playing a creature-heavy deck, this will let you get a bunch of creatures out really fast, really quickly, and you're just going to try to burst them down with a bunch of these creatures. We have another one of our mythics, Furnace of Wrath. You're going to get greater might and greater vulnerability. You're going to do more damage. You're also going to take more damage. So it's one of those a little gambly, but I feel like a lot of times you're dealing more damage than you're taking. So I think you can make it work. Plus, it's just going to speed things up. And that's all we care about. Finally, we have Mark of Immolation. Whenever a creature you control dies, it deals 200% of its damage to nearby foes. And once you know it, we're going to have creatures dying normally. We also have a lot of effects in here that are going to make you sacrifice your creatures. And you can trigger off a little extra damage from those. It's really hard to narrow down what red likes. We have a lot of goblins we can work with, so it does have a go wide strategy. It does have some really big aggressive creatures as well. It really likes those really aggressive sorceries, where you're just doing a bunch of damage. And it just seems to be a really aggressive color in general. That's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like to leave a like, comment, subscribe, that'd be great. If not, that's okay too. Either way, I hope you guys have an awesome day, and I will catch you next time.